Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Is innovation in utilities really about new tech, or is it about how leaders make decisions? Find out on today's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, VP of Technical Strategy at AEIC and host of the Grid Mod Pod. Today, I'm talking with Kim Getgen, CEO and founder of InnovationForce, and what it actually takes to modernize the grid and build a utility culture that can innovate without compromising reliability. This matters because grid modernization is not stalled by the lack of ideas. It gets stalled by unclear problem statements, misaligned incentives, and organizations that treat risk like a reason to stop instead of a reality to manage. In this episode, you'll learn why innovation is behavior and decision-making, not just technology, how risk aversion and incentive misalignment quietly blocks progress, and how change champions with clear problem statements empower them to turn innovation into real outcomes. So welcome, Kim, to the Grid Mod Pod.
Thanks, Liz.
Before we dive in, please introduce yourself in your own words.
Couldn't have done a better job. That is exactly right. So started InnovationForce because I have been thinking about innovation in the utility space around COVID. It started around COVID. I was just thinking just broadly, innovation, culture, capabilities, what is it? Why is it so hard? And during COVID, I had talked to a lot of my friends in various industries, and they all had these horror stories of trying to push this big rock up a mountain to drive change inside of their organizations when they had a new idea. And so that's when I really started thinking about it hard. But it was hey, I've been in this energy industry now for a while, and I've been sitting on the side of startups. I got to spend some time in large incumbent suppliers, and I helped drive innovation inside of utilities as a consultant. And so putting all these three pieces together, I started to see where we were getting stuck. And that's what encouraged me to start InnovationForce, which is basically an AI-driven SaaS platform. And the goal is to bring entire industries together to collaborate and reduce risk when it comes to trying out new ideas.
Love it. And so we'll start with the big question, but the word innovation, I've had this experience myself working within a utility. It gets used a lot in our space, and it sometimes energizes people, maybe far few in between. But sometimes, it feels abstract or even exhausting, right? Especially if you're in charge of keeping the grid on 24/7, 365, So for you, what does, and then you kind of embarked on it, but dive a little deeper, the spirit of innovation really mean? And particularly in a regulated and operationally critical industry like ours, right? So there's this common theme that we got to keep the lights on, we can't, right? So what I hear when I think, but I'm very, this is me thinking about it a lot. It's innovation is about movement. It's not about perfection. Yeah. It's really progress. So, right. What do you think that when I say spirit of innovation?
Yeah, no, it's got to have the outcome, but it's good to have a working definition. So I give everyone my working definition, which is very broad, but any innovation is anything new or useful that creates value for your organization or your customers. And so if you just stop and think about innovation is about creating the value, that is then very broad. And so I argue everyone innovates. And I'm going to make this argument throughout the podcast today because I feel like it's an important piece of flipping the script and how we think about innovation. But innovation is anything new to you. It may not be new to your peer. Maybe your peer did this demo and said, this wildfire widget was so great. Hey, Liz, you should try it. Liz would say, oh, okay, cool. But this is a new idea to our organization. Okay, it is new to your organization. And so that's going to come with all of the challenges, the risk framework. How do we do it? Who do we involve? So you're right. Going through this process for the first time inside of your organization. It is definitely innovative. And I'll end by saying I hear a lot of this in the energy industry, big I versus little I. Big I innovation, regulated utilities, we don't innovate. We don't develop at risk. I want to get into this in the podcast today and maybe be a little controversial. I want Liz to hear what she has to say. But big I innovation versus little I innovation. Big I innovation usually means, hey, we're developing something new, patentable,
Right.
fine, great, breakthrough. But little I innovation is just as important, and it can be incremental. It could be building on top of somebody else's previously deployed idea. It might mean you're partnering with someone and you've given a partner a big idea problem you need to solve, and they're going to actually develop it big I, meaning they're going to invest in it, but you're going to use it little I. So it's really important to know that depending on, I don't care how you define it in your organization. Maybe you're a large utility that has a venture, program. Maybe you have a corporate ventures program. Maybe you have a patent portfolio and you have the ability to be big I. Good for you. There's probably 5 to 10 of you out there. Great work. But the rest of us doing little I innovation is just as important because it drives the change that we need to see across the entire grid, from large IOUs to municipals to co-ops. We're all doing it and we need to do more of it.
Right. And I guess, I think, the idea, one thing I talk about a lot is the language we use, the stories we tell are incredibly powerful. And so when we think about grid modernization, the term and the title of this podcast, and to me, it's an essence. It's not just a technology or a tool or a platform. I think we've kind of siloed or maybe tunnel visioned over this story being told. And quite frankly, the story started around smart grid and the evolution of really incorporating IT systems to integrate into operational processes.
Correct.
I mean, like carte blanche, right? And that truly is a generation, transmission, distribution, customer. And so the more and more I'm in the space and leaning into why is there such a challenge to create progress in individual entities? And truly it comes down to human behavior and people understanding what is actually being asked of them, and or where is the end goal, or aka what's the North Star. And then what happens if you're not revamping that story and leaning into what the intention is, reflecting on progress, and this continuous cycle of just what it means to move anything in progress, like you said, like a continuous improvement, grounded in operational excellence, like all of these buzzy words, but like innovation kind of got, or maybe there is some camps that latched on to what, that burden of like the big I, little I. And so when you're just a co-op or muni or, a small size or mid-size, you're not doing big I, you're actually just effectively trying to make change for the better of more. And so that's sometimes really hard to communicate because you kind of get stuck in these silos. So
and they don't have the same cachet, right? At a conference or something.
We're constrained by budgets or regulation or this risk aversion that we all say that we are, but like, what does that actually mean? So we start using our own buzzwords to almost talk us out of the idea of innovating. So what I see is the time and really the execution process. There's quite a lot of friction right now. So I think it's ever more important that we expedite maybe the language that we want to see the industry use. Maybe we're naive to believe so, but truly I think if you have that whole domino effect, like a ripple effect, if we bring a tool or a capability or even the collaboration space, you could reduce some of that time and expedite some of those learnings, right? And so that's kind of, where innovation occurs, is being able to have these communal collaborative conversations with, kind of the plan visible. So, the naysayers can engage, right? So I guess, thinking about what you've kind of created and where you've seen your space, evolve, when you're working across organization, what have you seen, and how have you seen some things being unlocked in what's truly holding innovation back in regards to this cross collaboration kind of
Yeah.
need to really progress your projects?
Yeah. That's where we need to get to is more industry wide cross collaboration. And we have, you know, really good foundational organizations and elements of that. But what I hear most of my peers complaining about, and they come to me with a culture problem, they're like, oh, we just don't have the culture to innovate at my utility. What they're really saying is, I have a risk problem. Culture is risk problem disguised
Right. It's yeah.
because the
Who
culture
owns the risk?
at most utilities is to be risk averse. We cannot take this new startup idea off the shelf and break something. We cannot go into a utility like a startup minded person and take a sledgehammer and throw the baby out with the bathwater because we have to slowly implement change on systems that have been around for decades. And so you just can't flip a switch like we're used to turning
Yeah.
the lights on in our house. You just can't flip the switch and have the big breakthrough show up really overnight. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this because we're going to see more generation popping up on the grid at new places, and it will feel like that perhaps. But inside of a regulated utility, the problem around culture is really a risk one. And so, who wins that argument at the end of the day? If you're a new innovator with a new idea, you come back from Distributech, you found the latest wildfire widget, you have a wildfire problem, you have wildfire budget, and you start taking this new idea through your organization. And after 2 years, you call me and you say, I don't understand why it didn't get deployed. I don't understand why it didn't work. It was because your organization is attuned to snuffing out risk.
Right.
And
They're like
so, yeah,
risk ownership, and then thinking about how many like decision latency. It's not like they're
yes,
not willing or
right.
able or would like to. They truly like the risk aversion slows the decision making,
Yeah,
and to the outsiders looking in as a disadvantage, but there's actual churning of
yes.
effective like progress, but it there's just so much hurt, so many obstacles that are created by this inability to move
Right.
quickly, right? And
Exactly.
and the priorities, and I guess that's going back to like strategy
Yeah.
and operating the actual group. So it's kind of too far from the actual people who execute. So
Mhm.
there's like this like
Yes.
time lapse.
Oh,
Yes.
totally. And so you are bringing in this new idea because you're closest to the problem. However, the people who are all the ultimate decision makers are removed from that problem now. And so they don't feel as urgent, right? They might have painted it as a North Star vision, but it's not as urgent to them. And so what we're constantly negotiating across this risk dialogue is sense of urgency, priority of budgets and time. And so it is a very, very complicated human process inside of a large regulated organization to innovate. But as long as we have that awareness and we can go into it eyes wide open, what I would like to see shift in our industry is us maybe talking about culture. Its culture is important, don't get me wrong, and I'm going to get into all that. But I would like us to shift our dialogue for those of us who have innovating and really understand it as a risk issue. And if I want to move my idea through this complex business, I have to look at it through the risk threshold eyes of the business owners. And so
Right.
that's what you're getting people comfortable with risk and you're negotiating that compromise.
And I feel like, we as humans do not know what we don't know. So if
Right.
you're this, passionate, active executor that understands a problem, if you don't know what the ultimate discussion is that prioritize the doers,
Right.
and it's not something that's taught unless you're actively opening doors, asking questions, moving
Yeah.
around, asking more questions. And so, like, if we can eliminate all of
Yes.
those opening doors and asking questions, and quite frankly, depending on what seat you sit in, you may not even have accessibility to the right people to ask the right questions. So it
Right.
actually might take 5 to 10 different
Mhm.
people that are well-meaning, well-to-do, positive intent
Yep.
that just don't have the lever that you need to
Right.
minimize the risk, which is, there are ultimately decision makers that say, okay, we're going to go. but that always isn't transparently obvious
No,
from the get-go, even for the best intentions type projects.
correct.
And one thing, through this active machine that's happening is utilities have engaged with new technology in many spaces. And I think a
That's
lot of
right.
this podcast shares those
Mhm.
stories. But so, there's this sense of pilot purgatory
Yes,
because we latched on to others that have learned lessons that if
yes,
you say pilot,
right,
it reduces risk. I mean, boom, there it is.
right,
So we though now sit in this pilot purgatory. And so I think we are doing a better job.
right.
But again, time is of essence of opening the doors to startups, but we when we disguise it as a pilot or experiment or engage, it leaves a lot of work undone. So, what
Absolutely.
feedback are startups getting or not
Yeah.
getting that you've seen,
Well,
and what
this is a
momentum have you seen?
yeah, this is where we got to rethink our model a little bit about big I and little I. If you are not developing new technology at risk to solve the wildfire problem, and you're relying on this brand new startup who has this awesome capability because they're the AI gurus, you have now outsourced your risk to them because utilities, we don't develop at risk. We don't have the budgets. We don't have the R&D budgets to quote unquote develop these new things. So in essence, what we were doing is kicking the can down the road and we say, we're going to outsource it to our supplier. And more, those suppliers are startups when it comes to new ideas, right? Because incumbent suppliers, I love y'all. I've worked inside of these large ones as well. We are just as bogged down in the complex risk problems as the utilities because we're often publicly traded and have to deliver very short-term results and earnings to Wall Street. Therefore, our risk dialogue is almost as bad as the utility, and we'll outsource it to our startup supplier, startup partner
Yeah.
as well. So let's just call it what it is. In the energy industry, we are basically taking the risk, outsourcing it to an outside party, which is more and more becoming a startup. And where does the startup get their money? Well, the startup is often venture backed. So the ingenuity, the innovation that is coming into the energy industry is dependent on a rich VC community willing to develop at risk on our behalf to make the grid better. But here's some more bad news. If you are a startup trying to get funded, you do not have access to the typical Silicon Valley VC community, for example, that I had when I started my first cybersecurity company, right? Because that community got burnt by utilities almost 2 decades ago. And a lot of them have exited the energy industry. And so when you take your pitch as a startup to a general VC, they are also looking through a risk threshold and trying to decide, do I want to put my 5, 10, $15 million in your company? And they're like, oh, your number one sales target is a utility. We're out. You
Right.
don't even make it past the word utility. They are out. So the VC community that these startups are dependent on to develop your new idea at risk utilities is a very small subset of the overall VC community. And so what we have is a very, very, very difficult problem of where are we getting the money? Let's follow the
Right.
money. Yeah.
And so it's not a technology problem because we see all of the
Right.
technology being
Right.
invented and available at our fingertips. It is I love it, trust, communication, and ownership problem. And so
Right.
that requires leadership courage. And so, like, what is
Yes.
leadership? That's my whole other passion. This is not technology. Like, the capabilities and having full situational awareness of all assets and understanding the current performance of actual grid today and being able to study it, predict it, analyze it, feedback loop is all staring at our eyes. But it's really that conversation. How are we going to partner
That's right.
with the minds and the capabilities that the regulated, highly adverse risk takers need in a very expedited fashion? I mean,
Yes.
there's almost, it's a gap between strategy and operations. So
That's right.
utilities have their strategy groups, utilities have their innovation groups, but if they cannot Like innovation fails when it lives too far from the
Correct.
operations.
Absolutely. And this is the big problem. Okay, so what we're getting at now is the incentive alignment issue. So everyone is well intentioned. When I run into somebody in an I'm from a startup. My VC just put money in my company. I'm excited. I've got this pipeline of deals I'm about to close with my pilots. And I'm going in and I'm wondering, why am I stuck in pilot purgatory? It's often because the incentives are not aligned. Okay. My incentive is back to my VC, and I'm giving them updates on how well my cash flow and capital is going. Like, how am I using your capital to go develop value? And in today's world, the VCs look at these business models and they're like, if you can't get from $1 to 100 million in annual recurring revenue in less than 5 years, I'm not interested. I'm not kidding. That used to be the metric for
Wait,
the
I think we should
unicorn.
say it again.
Yeah, it is. So it's hard out there, right? And
The
so
$1, wait, say that again.
to go from the VCs now, if you can't show them a business model that goes from 1 to 100 million in annual recurring revenue in less than 5 years, they are not interested in your startup. So that's another really, really difficult thing that we in the energy space have to deal with, because we are not going to go from 1 to 100 million in 5 years. A few have, but it's very, very hard. We need more patient VC capital. And so there's an incentive misalignment, because now I've got to feed my investors information and show them, how am I creating this exponential growth? Whereas the utility is saying, whoa, 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 slow down, slow your horses down. We're going to take your new widget in as a pilot, but that doesn't mean we're going to buy. That doesn't mean we're going to do anything at scale. We're going to have to do a lot of thorough work on this.
Even
And so
then,
we're totally misaligned. Yeah.
maybe this is me saying something I don't really know. Even then, because the utility is a regulated entity, there is no real model for anything to go from $1 to 100 million in less than 5 years, because where does that then cost fall? Right? Like, I mean, how would you
Yeah.
even commercialize
What you're
anything
getting,
within a regulated utility to
right.
do that?
Wait, yeah. And it's the Berkeley report, Liz. So there was a report that Berkeley Labs wrote about these. So it goes back to, where are the dollars going when it comes to demonstration projects, R&D projects? Like, where is the money going? And, like 1.2, 1.4 billion, somewhere in that range, we've seen invested in California through Epic. So the, Berkeley Labs, and they had done this report on, regulatory demonstration projects. And they're like, where's this bottleneck? Like, we're putting all this money into this innovation. We've spent 1.2 billion in demonstration projects over 10 years in California. Why the heck aren't these startups seeing product market fit? What's going on? And of course, lo and behold, the bottleneck is the quote unquote utility, because they don't have the dollars,
Right.
right, to be able to fulfill the needs. Like, we have more holes than we have hammers and nails. And so now we've got a lot of good technology that will never see the light of day because of
Right. So I really
this.
do believe it's a space to drop, but how do leaders design innovation programs that respect operational realities? Like
Correct.
operations of a utility, I think the more, and hence my passion by educating that bridge of
Correct.
strategy and operation is, there's an incredible amount of thought leadership required
Yes.
to, one, access data that has now been more available than ever, backhaul it, organize it, govern it, pipe it, place it in a position that your planners can have access to it, your cost of service folk, your rate making folk, your transmission planners, your distribution planners, which then funnels into, effectively your GIS and understanding the physicality of your assets and how they lay out and how they'll respond to all
Yeah.
of these various measures, into the hands of the designers, the engineers. I mean, it goes all the way down to then
Right.
the actual physical operation of the grid to ensure that electrons flow safely, affordably,
Correct.
and reliably. And I guess not the VC firms, the regulators, and all of the external parties that are setting up this incentive within the utility have no knowledge of that complexity.
Correct. And that's where I think we need to have more open conversations about our incentives. And I actually have done this. So I'll go into my utility or my customer and I'll say, this is what my, VCs or my investors are looking at from me. Can you give me this and I'll give you that? Like, I mean, it really does, come down sometimes to that negotiation. And it is important, I think, for us just to kind of like be more transparent about it all because
Right,
we
like
are incented
transparency and
differently.
feedback, right? Like
Exactly.
say what you want, receive the information,
Because we
and there
can
has
we
to
can
be
win.
a place of trust. And
Right.
we know the space that we live in
Right.
2025. What even is to trust?
Right. Come up with these win-win, frameworks, but
Win, win, win. Yeah.
right, it has to be win. But the data piece is so key because if you go back to the VC model for a second, VCs want to invest in companies that can get to 1 to 100 million because they are taking advantage of data, AI, cloud. Okay. So most of these new startups that come in are already at a disadvantage in our industry because they're like already in a cloud-based model where they're trying to build off of our annual recurring revenue. And that's kind of at odds with the business model, in the utility where, and maybe we could talk a little bit about SaaS, but the annual recurring revenues that back the high potential growth and data is really, really important to the startup, but it's hard for the utility because they haven't
Well, right. And
without
I
this.
guess just for our listeners, like the world of the utility and kind of the infrastructure that's been built, wrong, right, or different. And actually, the more you learn, the more you know, the more you don't want to know. Just kidding. But like, there's reasons why the grid has been constructed the way it's been constructed, there's a beautiful history lesson here. Where we were, where we are, where we ought to be. But
Yes.
to get to build out the enormous amount of infrastructure that was required from like 1920s and 1980s, right, was hand over fist, just like execution on large infrastructure, physical,
Yep.
large machinery. And to do so was in a very hierarchical
Yep.
phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, execute, 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 right? Put the lines up, charge for the electron flow, kind of end story. But then, like in the 70s and 80s, when software and
Yep.
IT and communication and computers became a reality, like there's this whole space of agile project
Yes.
execution, which is a whole different
Yep.
phenomena of
Yep.
this linear thinking,
Yep.
this hierarchical execution, this like I say you do, no questions asked.
Yeah.
And now you have software that is becoming a reality to all of us, that having access to this enormous amount of data that has always been present, but really nowhere to place and store. And there really was an understanding of the power of that data and how it all connects together
Right.
until the last 10 years.
Right.
Now you have all of these systems that are disparate, fragmented, and it was okay because we built this machine in this linear thinking, one way power flow. This is how it executes, wrong way or different. Don't touch it because it's very complex, right?
Yes.
Mentality. And now you have this whole world of exploratory, like neural networks
Yes.
that are highly complex and even more complex than that linear system that we spent 100 years building.
Yes.
And so it's just like a big bam. And
Right.
so the utilities themselves are incentivized for this linear execution of infrastructure. And there is not enough conversations around those that create the incentives to
Yes.
understand that now the backbone of the grid is IT systems
Correct.
and the software. So you
Right.
said SaaS, which is
Yes.
software as a service,
Yes.
which means utilities are outsourcing a larger body of people, which are companies, to procure a piece of software that then they will license, which
That's
then
right.
it's never really an owned asset by a
Right.
utility.
It's
So
like
they
a
can't
leased asset.
truly capitalize.
Right. Right.
And so here we go. So like there's just a complete gap of this transformational change. And quite honestly, the conversations I keep having, I'm sorry, I'm getting excited,
Yeah.
is, well, how's this impact all of the external pressures that utilities are up against? And it's like, what do you mean? It's everything.
It's everything.
It's system
Data is your new
capacity.
asset.
It's
Yeah.
interconnection queues. It's,
Yeah.
how to prioritize capital versus O&M and understanding what that means to the overall. It's
Yeah.
building resilient grid. Like, how do you
Affordable
build a
grid.
resilient grid if you don't understand the true performance of the grid? I mean, it goes on and on and on, unless you have this systems of systems, which is your IT and your software and your data. So
Absolutely.
there's the
And so
gap. What do we
there's a
do, Kim?
gap.
What
And
do we
that's
do?
exactly right. And so data is the new asset. You know what I'm saying? So like where we were spending all this money on infrastructure investment, the data is now the new asset. The data is the asset that is now your new infrastructure. And if we can tie innovation to that asset, if we can tie that asset and that innovation to affordability, we start to realize that we could unlock the potential of moving away from business as usual, which, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with business as usual, putting steel in the ground, undergrounding, whatever it is that we have had as these large capital
And
projects.
we will need to do that because the grid
Ex-
is it exploding? No, that's a bad word. It's imploding. No, that's a bad word. It's exponentially growing.
It's growing, and so we need more capacity, and we need more capacity, and the way you're gonna get the capacity affordably and fast, 'cause it's not just affordability, it's fast. We need it fast. So if we even as an industry, in my view, my humble opinion, if we're gonna deliver it faster, we need to really lean harder into cloud-based services and database assets, and they're coming from brand new startups with these really interesting ideas that are, and it's not, I'm not joking, like 3 people in a garage are building a system that you may use. And so your risk posture at your utility needs to consider that. But so do those 3 people sitting in a garage. Like when I was getting Innovation Force off the ground, we had to buy very expensive cyber liability insurance. That was a game changer. It was like, if I really want to sell to utilities, I have to meet their procurement supply chain standards. And so what we're saying to startups is, you have to play by these rules that will never change. Go buy your cyber liability insurance, go become SOC 2 compliant, make sure you've done all your cybersecurity checks. It is going to be expensive, but that's the cost of doing business with the utility. And so go get those risk checks done, because data is the asset, and data is what puts us in the pilot purgatory, because sharing data and the cybersecurity ramifications and all those operational issues, Liz, that you pointed out at the very beginning, have to be addressed so we can have a very intelligent, incentive aligned conversation, that we are not breaking anything. We're actually doing things in a very safe way to pilot, learn, and move to production. And will something be attacked? Will something break? Yes, that's of course a possibility. But if we've handled the risk conversation appropriately as part of this pilot process, we will know what we're going to do when that happens. So it's not like trying to build these impenetrable systems that will never break. It's knowing what you're going to do when, I'm sorry, like that Cloudflare, whatever it was that broke, and everybody was sitting in an airport 2 years ago. Even the best of the best, Microsoft, Amazon, we've all seen the big guys have these big hacks. We have to be ready for how we'll respond in this new day and age.
So many things to pick from that one, but knowing where we are with where we're going. One, I do think like this goes all the way back to what are we educating and informing our
Yes.
youth and our next workforce,
Yeah.
is this acknowledgement that when you do and you put forth effort, there is a potential to fail or misstep or not ace the test. That does not mean
Right.
you are invalid, incapable, and you shouldn't, move forward. Like that dialogue. And I know it really becomes an individual like awareness that like I am who I am. But like I think if we think about where that shows up in the adults that are now in this workforce environment is, being told no shuts
Yeah.
a lot of us
Yeah.
down because no
Right.
one taught us
Exactly.
that it truly could mean in a innovative, you know, next opportunity. Like, no means no, but no, like in regards like, well, the no why, right? Like
Right.
being brave enough to say, okay, why? And then that lesson that you learn is the process and the job that is
Correct.
required of us as individuals. And just for those 3 individuals that are in a garage innovating something that could transform a way a utility is doing, you need to have 3 champions of change inside a utility to be
Yes.
able to like take that
Oh, yeah.
and then integrate it.
You're
And so
never
I
gonna.
guess
Yes. So that's why the answer to your question is, what do we do? It's
right.
time to flip the script. And so what I advocate for is getting to this answer of, we need to flip the script. So the people that are subject matter experts that are closest to the problem in the utility, those operators, they're the ones that are really our innovators. And we need to be seeing them as innovators. It's not like the next whatever AI guru that comes into your utility and comes in and
Right, like the new
stresses the
emerging
heck out of you.
technology group, or
Yeah,
like this new innovator from healthcare trying to help
right.
utilities.
Good for you. You've come up with this new brainiac idea to go save the planet. We're excited. We want to trial your technology. But the pilot and the true innovation that's going to happen in my utility, little I, is going to come from my operator who's going to take your idea, weave it into the fabric of our infrastructure, and figure out how we're going to make this thing work. And that's where the true innovation really
Right.
happens. And that subject matter expert that is closest to the problem, probably a team of people, they're closest to the problem. They know it better than anybody. They know it better than their bosses, the bosses' bosses, all the way up the food chain of the utility, as well as that startup. But the startup is trained in design thinking and being very innovative, big eye, and they're coming in going, teach me, how is this going to work on your grid? Oh, you need this layer of, reliability and redundancy with your cloud. Guess what? I can go containerize something and make sure it's in both
Right,
clouds,
it's almost
yeah.
expect that we don't know what we don't know. And when you have
Yeah,
two worlds coming together,
right,
that
right.
education, that partnership,
The partnership.
collaboration is a necessity. It's no longer I am the customer, you're my client,
Yeah,
I pay for this, give it to me, right? It's a
right,
whole
exactly.
new
The new
ecosystem.
world.
So I guess to make it practical, because we're gonna wrap up here, is like many of our listeners, and my hope is many of our listeners are change champions, especially inside the utility. And so they see the need, like you said, the operators are the innovators. They feel the urgency and they want to act. So like what's one piece of advice or maybe one idea that is something a change champion can go do today or really, fill
Right.
their bucket, right?
Yeah.
To help move innovation forward in a
Right.
meaningful way.
One thing you can do is to really get clear on your challenge statement and your problem statement. And so I see the difference between quote unquote good innovation and bad innovation, or maybe innovation that drives outcomes versus those that get stuck in pilot purgatory. And this speaks to both sides of the house, whether you're selling to a utility or you're a utility adopting an idea. It comes down to having a very clear problem statement. And I think we're getting better at this as an industry. But the beauty lies in starting with the problem and describing the problem it is that we're trying to solve, and then framing around that problem. So, it's the onus, in my view, is really on the utility and the operator, the people closest to the problem, to have a clean problem statement to describe in one sentence, two sentences, my problem is X and I'm looking for Y. I'm missing this capability gap. I'm looking to fill it with Y. And being able to talk to your solution providers and saying, not just like an RFI, RFP, check off these boxes. It's how do you intend to solve my
Genuine
problem?
connection with others that have answers.
Yeah. And get
Eventually.
them to frame their solution. And this is what I hear in the utilities all the time. I'm so tired of the marketing. Great. Go to them with your problem statement and say, solve this. Tell me how your solution will fix this. I know your solution will do these 100 things. I'm only interested in 3. I'll pay you the full price, but I only need 3 of these things that you do done
Yeah, because
very
one
well to
use
solve my
case
problem.
that
Yes.
can prove value. And
Correct.
now, through my efforts in this podcast and everyththing at AEIC, is there's this enormous wealth of knowledge that has been gained by just executing one use case of value. And actually, this leads me to our final
Bingo.
thought. There is a set of technology or like tech stack
Solution stack.
and capabilities that were
Yeah.
required to do that one. But when it's done well with the end in sight, you can go from executing one use case in 9 months to then doing
Yes.
one every 2 weeks. And
You got it.
in like 2 or 3 years, you're unlocking use cases that this industry's
Unlock potential, unlock value,
right.
true
And
innovation.
there's an actual flow. And so what I'm
Value.
excited about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you and I are going to
Yes.
be, doing some collaborative work in the 2026.
Yes.
I dated our podcast, where we're effectively going to show this process and this thought leadership, utilizing the tool that you've invested, your passion into, just to really educate and inform what the outcomes are and how that can expedite
Totally.
some of these common challenges that we have identified, across the industry, which I look forward to doing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
My
I just want to share a little bit more in depth
well,
of that
I was
activity.
gonna just say, like, my appeal in that would be if you're listening to this or you're part of this working group that Liz has been leading, it's about teaching capabilities. And so what's exciting is we're gonna teach the capabilities to drive really smart, risk-informed ways to innovate inside of regulated utilities. We're gonna teach you the capabilities inside of how do you solve real grid mod problems. So you're gonna run with real challenges you have. You can find real use cases and solutions to go pilot, but you're gonna learn the capabilities because the answer is in teaching more of us those capabilities on how to drive this innovation and change inside the grid step by step to get to the end value, the end outcome. And so it's really about teaching the
Right.
capabilities as much as
And full
anything.
circle,
Yeah,
you never know what doors will be opened in your path if you are curious and a life learner. But it was about 4 years ago, where maybe five, I was taught, well, Elizabeth, where's your cost benefit analysis? When I was working with a utility,
right.
I was like, cost benefit analysis? They're like, well, how much money do I have to invest and what value will I gain at the end? And it was like, oh, okay. And I remember I was like calling up my friends. I'm like, what are these? And it was nothing that was formalized or was I educated, but I very quickly understood, like engineered the problem. I was like, oh, well, it's going to cost $1 million. Am I able to show over a certain period of time that we will either save dollars, aka, which is a positive, and or create revenue? And so I started doing these little spreadsheets and creating these tools. And I remember being called out in an innovation room. We're like, well, Elizabeth, no one knows how to do these cost benefit analysis. I was like, well, let
Right.
me be your
Yeah.
teacher. Anyway, so
Yes.
that's one of the multiple steps that you and I will kind of share and
Right.
champion
To
through this.
take the
It's a powerful tool that you don't know what you don't know. So if you're a change champion, you don't know, it's time to put pencil to paper, that you are the one, you are the answer that will then drive that type of language to then put in front of the right audience to kind of contribute through. So I
I
look
love that
forward
you are the
to becoming
answer.
that teacher officially with you. And so thank you for such a thoughtful and grounded conversation today. And really, your perspective helping to demystify innovation, especially from the financial perspective. But it all comes down to the people, the processes we're enhancing, the decisions that will be made. And to do that, we must execute. So
That's
thank you,
right.
Kim, for your
Yes.
time today. And I look
Yes.
forward to our collaboration in the future.
Me too. It's gonna be fun.
And to our Grid Mod Pod listeners, thank you for spending time with us today. These conversations are truly meant to support you as you navigate the real work of modernizing the grid from the inside out. So until next time.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.